Okay, so we are recording this session. So if anybody doesn't want to be on the recording, be sure to mute yourself or keep your camera off. But I do still, I encourage to be interrupted and ask questions. Just because we're recording doesn't mean not to do that. So for those of you who might be watching this recording in the future, I'm sorry, but we forgot to start the recording at the beginning and we missed, I talked a little bit about the features in the farmers market site that we're trying to build. And now what I'm going to do is walk through a little bit and talk about how we built, what tools we use to build some of these and how we do it for those that are interested. And I'm actually going to start by asking, is there anybody here that that's interested in anything that I've shown you or particular that you'd like to know how you would do these things? A lot of it is pretty basic, I understand. So I'm going to, again, some of these things like this block here is kind of intended to show, there's a number of different ways you could do this. And I like this module called Fancy Block. And so this feature was partly added to just show how somebody could use something like Fancy Block to do this without having, again, to touch the theme or write any, no custom code, to just create 3 blocks like this. There's actually, since I first learned how to do this with Fancy Block, I found a couple other ways. Although what Fancy Block provides is these icons, so that you can, actually, let's go ahead and take a look at that. I've got to switch back to log in here. This is my local dev version of the site, which might not match the online version exactly, but it's getting there. So the Fancy Block module, it's basically a block that you add in a region, and then it creates, actually, let's go to our layouts page. This is the home page. We're going to go manage blocks, and we have the Fancy Block icon block. And basically, the Fancy Block module provides this block that you can add on your site, which lets you pick a grid of any number of items. So I chose 3. We could do more or less. It lets you pick things like, do you want the icon at the top or the bottom of your Fancy Block? And you can pick if you want a circle or a square. It uses Font Awesome, and you have access to the whole Font Awesome library to place an icon along with some text and a link. And you're making some general choices here. You can also do things like set the background color. I think there are a few bugs in this module, which means that not all of these features are fully working as they expect. Doc Wilmot did this module a long time ago, and he has so many modules that I think I agreed to be a co-maintainer on it at one point, and we need to get some of these bugs fixed. But this is a perfectly usable and workable module the way it is. And if you do find any bugs, just report them and we'll try to get them fixed. But anyway, so you make a few configuration choices in the block. And then once you've picked the block, you can you do that here? No, I think we have to go to the, well, from the front end, I can go down and use the contextual menus to now get into any one of the 3 blocks or the 3 grid items that I selected. And this is where I put my text that I want. I can pick from any of the Font Awesome, and there's icons. And again, this is one of the beauties, one of the things, other ways you could create this kind of layout in Backdrop wouldn't necessarily provide you with this image library, although you could, you certainly could add this yourself or figure out how to use Font Awesome. But if you're a beginner and you don't know how to use Font Awesome, this is really helpful. What's unfortunate about this is that one, it doesn't show you the icon. And two, I was going to say that it doesn't have them in alphabetical order, but it does seem to. I wonder if that is something that got fixed. It used to be that they weren't in alphabetical order. So if I knew there was an ambulance, I would have to like scroll all the way through this list to find the ambulance. But now they seem to be sorting in alphabetical order. Again, I'm going to pause. Any questions or thoughts? The map here, again, there are multiple ways of doing a map like this in Backdrop. We chose to use the simple Google Map module. And again, I try to, on learnbackdrop.org, like for example, I have building the front page, and I have some individual pages then. And this is, for example, how to add the blocks. And it talks about some of the different tools and blocks I used. I thought, oh, here it is. Under adding the blocks, it has each one. So it has instructions on how to build the policy block with fancy block. And it has some screenshots on how to do that. And it has, for example, instructions on how to build the map block. And the map block, we're using a module called Simple Google Maps. And basically, Simple Google Maps is exactly that. It's, if all you want is a map with a point on it, you can download and install this module. It gives you a block. Actually, that's the wrong one. Here we go. Let's go to, it doesn't matter. Let's go to the, we'll open this contextual menu. We'll edit the block. And it just asks for a title of the block, and it asks you to type in an address. I think that there is some block configuration about how big the map displays and things. But basically, all you have to do is enter the, I believe what we have is a node that has that address, and all you need is the address, and then you go to configure the block, and you pick the node that has the address in it, and you can make a few other selections here to style that. Actually, it looks pretty limited. You know what it is? It's in the full content, or it's in the displays. So if we go to, we have a location content type. We created that. We created a location node. Here we go, location filter. And this is the node we already looked at. Basically, the node just has an address field, nothing fancy. But if we go to the content type for location and we go manage displays, here we go. We have to configure this to be Google Map from one line address. And then here's where our configuration is. We can set the sort of size and width of the map, how zoomed in we want to be. So we can zoom in really tightly, or get way out. We'll switch the map so that it's way out. And that did not work, or do I have to refresh? Let's try that again. That was in the content type, location, manage display. Maybe we're configure. You know what, I wonder, no, I should just save it once. Okay, I think I zoomed in tighter instead of zooming out farther. Anyways, a really simple way to add a map to your site. Usually I use, if you want to put multiple places on a map, there's a whole nother suite of modules you can use. We tried to keep this really simple. I'm going to pause again. I'd love to hear some questions or feedback. I'm checking chat to see if anything in chat. No.
I might have missed this at the beginning, but since the recording was started late, it might be
Yep.
good to recap it anyway. Um, uh, what's sounds kind of silly saying it, but what's the purpose or goal of
Sure.
this site being like I saw that you also have it publicly hosted, but because using contrib modules like the simple
Right.
Google Map make it so that it kind of precludes doing the same thing in core as like a sample profile or something like that. What's the situation in which people would probably take a look at this?
Well, I think ultimately the tutorial is intended for this sort of site builder who wants to build a site using that has features similar to these, right? We don't expect that people want to build farmers market websites, but we expect that they want to build websites that have these same features in them. And a lot of these things can't be done in core. So this tutorial is not intended to be like just for how to do things in core, but it is intended to be how you can do this without having to do any custom coding or necessarily even create your own sub theme. So it's basically what modules do you need and how do you configure them to create these kinds of features. All right.
Got it. So it's
Is that
almost like the sorry if I toot my own horn here, but it sounds almost like a chapter out of like the Using Drupal book, where it's
sure?
like putting
Well,
forward a hypothetical scenario, solving that problem,
yes.
and then learning Backdrop in the process. Yeah,
Exactly. That's exactly. I don't feel like we have, and you know, survive. We've talked about this in the outreach meeting that we don't really have those kinds of resources like Drupal does, right? And this was it's sort of intended to go in that direction, to be that kind of a learning tool. And it was also inspired by, of course, the Drupal 8 user guide, right? Which folks like Joe Schindler put a lot of work into. Uh, and I helped out early on a little bit with the Drupal 8 user guide, where they did a similar thing. Although, and you could correct, I don't know if you know anything about that, Nate. Sarvashri and I were a bit surprised to find that there is a guide to building a farmers market site for Drupal 8. So we stole that idea from them. What Sarvashri and I were surprised to find is that there isn't any that they have instructions like on how to do it, but they don't have like a finished site for you to look at. And we thought it would be really nice to have to actually build out the site so that people could see what it looks like when it's done. And if they were following the tutorial, they could sort of see the finished site and see what they're trying to build and build it along. But the biggest goal here is that it's a learning tool. Okay.
yeah, great.
And I'm diving in right now with you. You know, we could just talk about this as a learning tool, and people could, you know, I'd be happy to just get feedback on how to make this a better learning tool. Or if people are interested, I can actually, you know, talk about it, which is what I started to do here, which was to talk about some of the things, the specific lessons in the tutorial, which are things like how to build a map. Does anybody have any preference there on how we can use our the next half an hour?
Well, if I may interject, I went over to the YouTube site and saw all the videos that you've started to put up, and I think that's excellent. And one of the challenges I faced, and it's something that popped in my mind in one of the earlier sessions when we're talking about, you know, how do you market, you know, something like Backdrop. Right. And again, when you look at us, and when I say us, I mean, you know, all of us within this community, and whether it's Drupal or WordPress, you know, those of us as devs, et cetera, you know, we all know how to talk amongst each other, right? Right. But when I go out and I talk to, you know, try to convince someone, hey, you got to use this. And the first thing that a lot of these end users will do is pull up Google and say, okay, well, how do I do X in this software platform? And you know what I run into all the time is, well, God, how do I do X in WordPress? And I've got 15,000 videos. You know, how do I do X in Backdrop? You've got 30. So, I mean, it's obvious to me that, you know, the communications that we do, you know, amongst our own cohorts is fine, you know, but, you know, the work that you're doing here, I think is really exciting. And especially, again, tying back into that earlier session, is I think it makes the whole entire platform more marketable, because when you can translate that information to something that an end user is comfortable with, and again, you're providing these demo platforms for people to use, and that also builds a lot of confidence. People get out and then they can do it in a situation where they don't have to worry about how to set it up, and what's it going to cost me to set it up, and who cares if they destroy it, right? It's like you get in and play with it. So I really appreciate what you're doing here, because again, my take is I deal with a lot of end users, and that handoff is always the hardest thing for me. That's the hardest part, to create that confidence, is yes, you can do it, and no, you don't need to rely on me. Unlike say, a lot of devs with their agencies that want that end user coming back to them consistently. I'm not necessarily in that position within the organizations or the trade groups that I'm involved in. I get in there and I join and get on the boards, and as someone with a little bit of influence, I'm just trying to create direction. But at the end of the day, I'm not earning an income from building these websites. I'm just trying to influence what direction people go. So I know that's a little bit, out and about, but I just wanted to basically say I really appreciate what you're doing here.
Well, thank you. And I want this discussion, what would be most helpful for me on this discussion is how to do a better job of that, right? Like, what could we do? Is this the right way to be teaching absolute beginners? And Sarvashri, if you want to step in and say anything about what you think of how, because Sarvashri, this wouldn't have probably happened if Sarvashri weren't coming to our meetings so often and saying, how does an absolute beginner, somebody that knows nothing about Drupal or Backdrop, but has heard about it and wants to learn how to do it, how do they learn how to build their own website rather than just hiring a developer? And it's his sort of persistence in talking about that is what's led to me and he and I working together to some extent, and then me doing a little more on my own to try and create this kind of a tutorial. Do you want to say anything or add anything, Sarvashri?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to it. One of the first things I found when I wanted to create a hero block and have the title over it in such a way that it would be both white and black and would stand out if you had both light and dark colors in your hero image. So we looked at what could we do to do that? How would you change that CSS? How would you pick fonts that weren't already built into the theme that we were using? What were the basic modules that you'd want to put in a Backdrop site? A lot of people, when they go to start their Backdrop sites, they've got their collection of favorite modules that they pull out usually that they're going to use with most developments that they, kind of things that people usually do. They'll have their favorite modules. So I looked at what would be the modules that might want to be considered in a new user's site, and what would you use them for? Things that most of you guys who have been doing development don't even think about anymore, but a new user doesn't know about. And I looked at how do you get your site up once you create it, and where do you create it? And I was looking at using a local development system, and Tim thought, no, we should put it up on the net somewhere so people don't even have to create their own place to build their site. It's already done for them and they can just go try it out. And then a lot of times people would go look at various sites that they like, search the web for a site that they wanted to do. And a farmer's market seemed like a site that a lot of communities might want to build, but they can go look at sites all over, and we did too. We started by looking at a bunch of sites around the country that were farmers market sites to see what they did, but you don't know how they implemented them. because they're not using Backdrop, or they're using some custom programming or whatnot. And so we picked out 5 or 6 sites, I guess, that we started with. And from those, we looked at the features that they had on those sites, the idea of vendors, and what the how a vendor would get started to become a part of that that farmer's market, or if people wanted to go to a farmer's market, maybe they're searching for some kind of fruits or vegetables that they want to buy, and does that farmer's market offer those things? So we wanted to be able to search for products on the site that a user would want to go to if they had a farmer's market in their town and they wanted to know whether the products were available. So you have the vendor directory, and you have here what products they have. And I think we had set up where you could search for the product that you wanted to look for and find out what vendors were going to be at that site, be at that market, and whether they had the products available or not, what they were going to showcase this next weekend or what have you at the farmer's market. So that's how we got started. We looked at different farmers markets sites around the country. We looked at what they offered, and then we tried to create something that would implement some significant features that we thought were important in farmers markets around the country. And so that's what we did.
So feedback that would be useful to me right now is like, if there's an important feature in Backdrop that a beginner should really know about, that we're not sort of exposing it in our model, then that would be something that would be helpful to us. Like, like I'm not thinking of any, using one example would be using the new cards feature, the pathless nodes.
Tim.
Yep.
Well, I'm thinking about a feature that might be useful here in Mexico. I don't know up there in the States, but these kind of markets here in Mexico are, how do you say this, itinerant? They don't install in the same location.
Sure.
Well, they have several locations, say the Monday location, the Friday location, etc. So a feature I probably want to use would be several maps with a calendar, and not all the vendors go every single day the market is set up.
Sure.
So probably the vendors list would also change a bit according to the location.
Right.
But that's something I know happens here in Mexico.
Right.
Or the vendor goes to different markets in different parts of the city. And so if you're looking for a specific vendor, you want to buy his honey or her jewelry or whatever,
Right.
you could look for that vendor and see where's his next suitable location.
Sure. So the kinds of features we're trying to build into this site are the kinds of features that aren't necessarily important for a farmer's market, but that are useful across the board for lots of different case studies. And then we're just adapting them to a farmer's market, right? So your example about a map is that, maybe having a moving farmer's market would be very useful to farmers markets. But I think my choice to just keep it to a single map was a little bit based on the most common use case that most users are going to have is they just need to show one place on the map. So we sort of adopted that as the use case for our example site, because we think that's more common. That the need to show a moving venue is probably less common. We could show that. It's just we have to limit because we can't show everything. That could be an advanced lesson, right? But your other example I like, which was a calendar. A calendar is not on this website yet. We did think about it, and actually I would like to do it because I think it's a super common use case, right? Almost lots of websites have some kind of a calendar, and so showing some or giving an example of how we built a calendar, I think would be a really useful use case here. And so, those are the kinds of examples I'm looking for. But yeah, so thank you. That's a good one. I mean, I love building maps. And so I like your idea about having a more complicated map or showing multiple locations. I just decided to keep it to a single location for now, because I think for a beginner, this is a good place to start. And then in the advanced lesson, we'll come back and do a more advanced map. Any other thoughts or feedback or anything you want to see? Again, a farmer's market doesn't need these JavaScript effects, but I thought a lot of people want that kind of thing on their site. So let's show them how to do that. And I just came up with some examples. This is by the way, and Sarvashri talked about like a good set of starting modules. Well, one of the things that we did was just, actually it's not here yet, I'm still working on that, I guess, is to create a list of the modules we used for this site, so that if you're a beginner and you're looking like what kinds of modules might be helpful to me, you could use this as sort of a list of I don't know, fairly common modules, or at least modules that I'm recommending that someone might want to look at. Now, the module we use for the JavaScript is not listed there. It's oops, no, it should be here. Reveal. Oh, you know what? I might not. I've got two versions of the map open. I think I haven't gotten to it on Reveal. There we go. Scroll Reveal, if anybody's curious, is the module that we use. And basically, it just lets you take specific classes for specific items and then define some JavaScript effects in a very clean UI and save it. And now anytime an item, and you can pick which pages you want this module to be on. Right now we have it active on all pages except admin pages. And then anytime it sees an item with these classes, it applies that effect. So yeah, that was the thought behind that.
Do we have any kind of search on here? If somebody's going to this website for farmers market and they want to search for, they know what they need, in their fridge, but they don't know if it's there. The first thing they should see maybe is a search.
Well, Sarvashri, you and I talked about that quite a bit, right? And search is a little bit of a complicated topic because there is sort of built-in a backdrop search that works good for some things. I think in our final site we had so you could sort of, we do have this filter here, which is a kind of search. So if you're looking for beets, you can come here and you can click on that and you can find out who sells beets. And a lot of websites actually are focusing more on things like this, filters, than search bars.
Okay, yeah. I remember we did something, and that's what your solution was to use a filter.
I kind of feel like there should be an ability to type in, to search for the name of a vendor, for example. I think that would be helpful in a fairly common use case that we might want to add to the site.
And if
But-
they have a blog, to be able to search a blog for something they've read before or something might be useful.
Yeah, see, the thing about that is I don't search websites that, like if I were looking for a vendor on this website, what I would probably do is go to Google and say Simplo, Anna's apples, and I use Google to search websites. And I think that's more and more common. More and more people are doing that. More and more websites don't bother to put search on their own website because Google does it better.
Don't people put a Google search on their website?
Well, that's something else that some websites do, yes. And I have a website that does that. You can sort of use Google to search just this website.
You have a button to search it and it uses Google to do it.
And it uses Google to do it. Or you can do the regular backdrop search, or you can look at what Justin was talking about last hour, which is solar search. That's a more advanced kind of search, which is not built into Backdrop, but you can use with Backdrop. So there's a whole number of different search solutions, and it all depends on what your budget is and how important search is to you. And again, a lot of our sites that we build just don't have that much content oftentimes if you build a really good menu system, that should help people find your content, right? You don't need a search. I mean, certain sites you're going to need a search. FMR, the site that I demonstrated earlier today, this website has thousands of nodes. So there's no way you're going to find articles in through the menu system. And we do have a little search bar here where you can search for turtles. And we'll see if anything, look at that. And this is using the default Backdrop search tools. But the default search tools have limitations. And so some people want more advanced search.
What else would people want when they go to
well, in
any site? That's what you're looking for, something generalized for any site. What else do you guys put on your sites that comes up all the time?
You're saying like features, what features?
Features, yeah, functions.
Yeah.
On sites generally, what comes up the most that should be demonstrated here?
I think that's a question for the audience.
That's a question for the audience.
If we're teaching beginners how to build a Backdrop website, what are the things they most need to know how to do? Learning how to use layouts. I mean, we are deliberately trying to showcase some custom layout things, so we get people into the layout system. We try to, again, the purpose for this whole vendor directory is that we want to showcase views. Oh, what happened here? Where did my vendor? Oh, you know what? Okay, again, I have two versions of this site. So we were looking at this one before that has the vendor directory. So one of the things that I actually spent time on last weekend, which is, I don't know if this was a good use of my time for this tutorial, but we have the vendor directory. And in order to me, if you really want to learn about building a directory like this, it's helpful to have some sample data and that you can work with. And I didn't want people to have to like build 20 nodes. There is the devel generate module, but I'm personally not a big fan of using that fake lorem ipsum data. I like real looking data to experiment with. And so I've actually created a spreadsheet that has, I've created a spreadsheet in a folder of images that somebody can use if they want to learn how to build this site. And they can use the feeds module to import all of these vendors into their site, including the images. And again, I'm always thinking about one, not just what do I want for this site, but what skills do I want the person to learn. And importing data with feeds is maybe not an absolute beginner skill. That might be a little bit more advanced. But I do think it's one of the things that if you know that Backdrop can do it, like that hey, I can import a spreadsheet of data and create 30 or 40 nodes, that's a really valuable thing to know. And it might get you excited about working with Backdrop. So I haven't written up the instructions for this, but like last weekend, I spent a whole day creating the feed template that I'm going to use, creating the folder, and figuring out how to add images if you're a beginner, which is how can you use feeds to import images? If you haven't tried that, that's a little bit tricky. And so I have now sort of a recipe that I can write up on how to do that.
Any comments from the audience?
Okay. Well, I think we're running out of time. I'm not going to necessarily start on anything new unless anybody has any questions or anything else they want to share. Any ideas for me on what to do next? I mean, hopefully some people have gotten some ideas just from the modules. Again, my goal today wasn't to teach you how to build a farmer's market website. My goal was hopefully to introduce you to some modules or some things that Backdrop does that you might not have known about, that you might be able to use on your site. So hopefully that's happened. Okay, for selfish reasons, I'm going to take the last 5 minutes and talk about the theme. Because I mentioned it earlier, it's the opera theme, and I think what I really want for the Backdrop ecosphere is a contrib theme that lets you helps you do things like this, create these kinds of layouts. I think it's a super common layout, and it's actually, again, not easy to do in Backdrop. This module uses the color module, so you can come into the, let me go to my tutorial site instead here. And if I go to the themes, so I'm using the opera theme, and basically what it does is it lets you pick some different sets of colors to use for those blocks on the front page. And by default, I wasn't sure how to do this. It would just, the theme would basically, the first block will all underneath the hero image will always be a white background. And then there will be 3 different color patterns that are available to you. And then the final block will always be a white background. And then you can change the 3 in between, and you can pick whatever color settings you want. And that's what these set 1, set 2, and set 3 are. And they will kind of repeat. We have some different default settings. So I can just change the default settings here and go back. Now my site has those background colors. Or I can dive into set 2, which would be this one, and change that to red. And but basically the main point is this ability, without writing a custom theme, to have these kinds of blocks. And that's the main thing the opera theme does. I would love for people to look. The opera theme, actually, I was hoping to do a stable release by Backdrop Live. I didn't. It's still kind of an alpha beta release. But I'm very close to doing I think a stable release for the theme. And I'd love for people to look at this and find out if it's helpful. Its primary audience is people who want to be able to create these kinds of layouts without having to sub-theme it. But you certainly can sub-theme it yourself as well.
This sort of thing is used on landing pages a lot, I think. Right?
Certainly on front pages of websites, it's used a lot. Okay. I think we're going to wrap it up for today. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Tim and Savashri. Great work.
Sure.
Thanks.
Great work, guys.
Thank you. Oh, we're still recording.